am so excited to have on our show today Dr. Ray Queener. He recently retired as superintendent in Minnesota and is one of few superintendents who was never a school principal. He's a father of 3 and likes to hunt, fish, golf, and read. Currently, Dr. Queener is a senior consultant for Teamworks International, a coaching company for school and district administrators. Today, he's on our podcast because he knows exactly what it's like when you have to meet with a teacher and have a parent-teacher conference, for example. And I invited him on our show today to help you the next time you have a meeting with your child's teacher. Maybe you get an email from the teacher saying that they want to meet with you, and did you ever have your heart skip a beat? And you're thinking, what happened? What did my child do? What's wrong? Or maybe you just have your normal parent conferences coming up scheduled, and maybe you're excited about it, or maybe you kind of are a little nervous, and that's okay too. Well, after talking to Dr. Queener, he was sharing with me ways to think about and plan for parent conferences that I think might really help you. So Dr. Queener, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So I know you and I were talking recently about parent-teacher conferences, and sometimes as a parent, it can just kind of feel daunting. I mean, I think as teachers and educators, we live in that world every single day. We are so comfortable, and sometimes it's hard to remember that when parents come in, it's not as comfortable and familiar to them. And so you had some really good ideas for parents, and so maybe if you want to just start sharing with us from there.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun as an educator and a parent to show up at parent-teacher conferences. Many times the teachers would ask, who are you? Why do you know all this about education? And but I think one of the things I learned about parent-teacher conferences is that it's really a two-way conference. It's not meant to be a one-way. It's not a sit and get, if you will, from the teacher to share only what's going on with the parent. And so I really kind of approach it as a partnership. And that means that both parties have to listen and learn because the parent sees a side of their kids that the teacher doesn't see, and the teacher sees a side the parents don't always see. And so kind of going in with eyes wide open and trying to listen and learn and figure out what's going on. If there are problems, or just, I always wanted to know beyond the grades kind of how my kids were doing. And so I always went in prepared knowing how they were performing academically so that we could spend time talking about, how do they get along with others? What are their other skills, and how are they doing in that arena that I don't see them in that environment? So I think the other thing that I wanted to share too is that a parent-teacher conference should be more of a check-in on an already existing plan. 2 times a year is not enough to stay connected. And especially if, a kiddo is struggling. And so if you're trying to map out a plan at a parent-teacher conference, that's probably not the best use. The plan should have already been developed and put together, and then to use the conference as a kind of a check-in. How are we doing? What's working at home? What's working at school? And then lastly, I think I would just share, I was the unique teacher that called all of my kids' parents in the first couple of days so that the first time they talked to me, it wasn't with a problem. I had never even had them in class yet. And I would call them and say, just want to introduce myself and say, looking forward to the year, and here's my number if you have any questions. And there were so many times there was silence on the other side of the line. They're like, you're doing what? School hasn't even started yet, And so, but yeah, I think kind of taking some of the angst out of the conference really helps just by approaching it with the right mindset.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny you said that, because when I became a teacher, I read that first 6 weeks of school book that I think everybody gets when they start teaching. And it talked about call your parents in the first few days of school with a positive. It's just such a great way to start that connection. And the first thing they hear from you isn't something that they're concerned about. It's something that it blew parents away. I remember calling, and I would go on my planning period and I called one day and the dad answered and he's like, where are my kids? And I'm like, they're at special.
Yeah.
Like it was just so funny. Like you're right, it totally caught them off guard, and it was one
Yeah.
of my favorite things to do. And yes, it was an investment. Yes, it was a time commitment, and it took away from a lot of other things you could be doing. But on the
Exactly.
in the long run, like it had such benefits, and
Yeah.
I just always recommend that and highly, to my teachers and teachers that the beginning. Uh, Months of school, the first month of school, I know it's so busy and it's just like one other thing, but man, does it make a difference. So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
makes me smile when you said that. I know you said to ask more questions, then provide statements. So that gives us something to think about when talking to a teacher. What kinds of questions? You had a couple ideas of like way to phrase things.
Yeah, I like to like I said, when I as a parent, I would go in and I would already know kind of if there were missing assignments, I was aware of that, what their grade was. Um, and I would argue that we probably have not done a great job as administrators. As you mentioned, I wasn't a principal, but I was a longtime administrator, superintendent, and I don't know that we've done a great job on prepping and or preparing and training teachers for high quality parent teacher conferences. So we're kind of throw them to the wolves, if you will, and say, here's parent teacher conferences, figure it out on your own. And so um, they kind of resort to what they're comfortable with, and they talk about grades and they talk about missing assignments and those types of things. But I always tried to have that going in, especially in today's day and age, where that's all readily available with the student information systems. But what I really wanted to dig into is how is my student doing outside of academic performance? Where how do they get along with others? I see how they interact with their brothers and sisters, and I pray that they don't do that at school, but so how are they engaging with other students? Are they outgoing? Are they more reserved? Do you see them leading or following? Do you see them as problem solvers, or do you see them as getting flustered and not willing to try or to persevere on challenges? So asking those types of questions to um, help explore your child from a different lens, I think is valuable. But it does a couple of other things too. So here's some inside magic. When you ask questions like that of the teacher, if they haven't been paying attention to that, they now know that when they talk to you, that's what you're going to be asking them. So they're looking for, well, here's Ray Queener's kid. We better pay attention to how they're getting along, and are they leading? And so you learn more when you ask the right questions, I think, around those situations. Um, but it for a lot of parents, the parent teacher conference is intimidating. Going into a school can be intimidating, and especially if their experience wasn't outstanding. And this, I don't have any research behind this, so this is a hypothesis, if you will. But I believe that the majority of teachers are teachers for two reasons. One, they care about kids, of course. And two, we were really good at playing school. We knew how to master the game of school. It wasn't intimidating to us because we figured it out. We either were gifted intellectually or we knew how to work the system, if you will. We knew how to navigate the system. So for us, walking into school, not a big deal. But for a lot of people, it is. And it can be intimidating, especially if they had challenges. So as teachers, if you can, understand that, and then as parents, try to overcome that by asking questions and diffusing the situation. So if I walk in and I'm already nervous and I'm expecting a confrontation, then I need to find language that calms the situation, that de-escalates the situation, that we don't have to have a confrontation, because we're both here to serve this student, this child.
Yeah. And I think that another question that could be asked is my child a risk taker?
Mm,
Or do they raise their hand? Do they volunteer? Are they afraid to volunteer? Are they afraid to make a mistake? Are they afraid to not know the answer in front of their peers? Like that tells a lot of information to a parent that they might not always see that on their end.
yeah, that's a great point. Um, And I think too, when there's a challenge, if a student is not performing or they're struggling, um, I always like to spin the question around. And so I would ask, and my kids weren't perfect. They had their challenges, but I would ask the question, if my student was your child, what would you do? Tell me how you would navigate the situation. And because I think sometimes we're really good at telling other people what to do, but when we put the shoe on, we may look at the situation a little bit different when we're walking in someone else's shoes. So I always try to say, help me understand what you would do as a parent if this was your child. And sometimes that reframing gets you on the same page and solving the challenge in front of you.
Yeah, yeah. And I was thinking of how sometimes they come to meet, but they're not really meeting. The teacher's like, the child needs to do X, Y, and Z, and the parent's like, wow, aren't I doing X, Y, and Z? Or so the parent feels like they're doing everything they know possible, and sometimes it's taking that perspective of really the parents doing the best they can. They really are showing up, doing the best they possibly can, and I really believe that about kids too. And it's just how do we help navigate where the teacher is meeting the expectations of X, Y, and Z, and how the parent can know that they're doing it and feel confident and know that they're doing it.
Right.
But sometimes you do see that disconnect, and it's like, how do you help them connect?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, we have to work on reducing those barriers. And we do a lot of strategic planning with schools. And one of the things I hear a lot of is, how do we engage our parents to be partners in education? And so, I've gently pointed out, don't blow any opportunities that already exist. Why don't we start there?
Yeah.
So when we have them in our buildings, let's make sure that we're welcoming, that we're able to speak at their level, that where they meet them where they're at. We're, as teachers, we're really good at meeting kids where they're at. I mean, that's our natural gift. So why are we unwilling to do that, or why is it harder with adults? And so I just think an open mindset and appreciation of where people are at, especially when you have to deal with a challenge.
Yeah, because it can be so hard. It can be,
Yeah.
frustrating, taxing, draining, on your health in general, and teachers are showing up, wanting to make a difference and wanting to help those kids, and they're doing the best they can too.
Correct.
But
Yep.
so you're right. If we can just take that approach of how can I frame this so I can, it's like kind of goes back to that old adage, seek first to understand.
Yes.
And a lot of times when there's a difficult situation or, something that you see one way, you just stop and help me understand.
Yeah.
This is what I noticed. Can you help me
Yep.
understand?
Yeah.
And man, how many times is that a helpful phrase
Yeah.
that doesn't go in judgmentally, right? But it just shows that you're open to hear, and you might learn something from a perspective you weren't thinking of.
Yeah. Well, and it's a little relevant, but Gervais Bush is author of a book called Clear Leadership, and it's a leadership book, but the material is so applicable to everyday settings. And one of the things he talks about is that no two people have the same experience, and we have to work to try to understand each other's experience before we can make a decision on what is. And so it's how do you navigate that? How do you appreciate other experiences and recognize that they're different than you? And I think that's, again, as you were talking about, that's kind of the language that we have to come into the situation. The teacher has an experience in the classroom, the parent has an experience at home, and at the end of the day, we got to understand each other's experience, but we're trying to support the child so that they can grow and develop.
Yeah, the goal is the same.
Correct.
But it's just stepping into the other shoes, right?
Correct.
How do you really know it until you walked a mile in that, person's shoes?
Yes.
So I know you said to advocate for your child with an open mind. What do you mean by that? How do we know when we have an open mind? What does that look like?
Well, maybe it was only my kids that ever did this, but their stories of when they came home from school upon investigation were not always exactly perfectly correct and true. It was their perspective of what happened. And so let me give you an example. So I remember a time where, and this is a true story, I came home and told, I think one of the middle children to get their homework done. Say it's almost dinner time, you need to get your homework done. And what they ended up reporting to their mother was that dad yelled at me to get my homework done. I did not raise my voice. I did not even speak in a stern tone. I just said, we got to get our homework done before dinner. So my point being is that interpretation of that experience from the student isn't always necessarily, especially with the language they use, necessarily what happened. So both as a parent, and I wasn't perfect at it, but as a parent and as an administrator, whenever I heard a version of a story, I tried to take a moment and pause and say, okay, I've heard this side. And I'm not gonna judge yet. I'm not gonna weigh in. I'm not gonna evaluate until I get the other side. And I know really most of the time when you get the sides, the real truth is somewhere in the middle. And so when parents hear things, student comes home and says, the teacher hates me. They're always mean to me. Whatever the situation may be, it could be true, but have an open mind until you are able to investigate it. And I think, again, the language that we can offer to parents that will be helpful, because we want to believe our kids. We believe when they come home and say that's the absolute truth. But when we go to talk with the teacher, ask the teacher, could I just share what I heard from my student with you and try to see what's going on here? That permission language, it just diffuses the accusations. And I think, it is tough in the education world right now. There's a lot of high expectations from parents. And I do think that there's a lot of assumptions made by parents, and it makes that connection with, between parents and teachers challenging. But if we can offer the introduction of a permission language of, can I share an experience with you about what my child shared with me? And can we explore this together to try to find out why they might have interpreted it, or what really happened, or what we can do to clarify and rectify the situation? Most people I know, when you ask that kind of question, they're not going to say, well, no, I'm not going to give you permission to share with me. I mean, we don't operate like that. Absolutely. Let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. But when you make the phone call and say, I was told that you did this, this, and this, that puts us in the corner and defensive right away. And it just creates a challenge. And it's both ways, teachers and parents. But I think sometimes we take the word of our students as the absolute truth, and we need to have an open mind that there might be more to the story than we're aware of.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so powerful what you said. And if we can just use the phrase, are you okay if I share with you an experience with my kid that happened and what happened? It's similar to help me understand. And I think a piece to this that's also critical to it being successful and not creating a challenge like you shared is also paying attention to your tone of voice. Because if you can say the same thing two different ways and it comes out completely different. Are you okay if I share with you an experience my kid said, right? It's automatically like you did something wrong.
Yep.
But are you okay if I share with you an experience with my kid and just tell you what happened? It's open and it's disarming.
Yes.
So sometimes when parents call and have a concern, first and foremost, have you shared this with the teacher? The teachers really, really appreciate hearing from you first. I'd just like to give them the benefit of the doubt to hear your concern and respond, and for you to find out what's going on. And
Yep.
I'll tell them, ask the teacher, can you help me understand? This is what I heard. This is what I've noticed. This is what I've seen. Can you help me understand? And I'll tell them, say it like this. And I tell them, if you say it like this, they're going to have their back up against the wall. It's not going to end up well.
Correct.
But and I asked the parents, I asked them to take a risk and go back to that teacher and just tell them what you noticed, what you observed, how it made you feel, how it made your kid feel. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent, and they may or may not, see it that way.
Correct.
But if you just say it, like I teach parents with their kids when they're in trouble, talk to them in an even tone voice, because when you yell or talk down to them, you shut down everything anyway.
Correct.
And everyone's defense, like you said, defense mechanisms just totally, rise up. So another way to think about what you will say in a parent-teacher conference, you were saying, is, I think you already touched on a little bit, when you're asking permission. Is there another phrase or question that parents can hear that maybe we can even jot down and write and practice the next time we're at a conference?
I like things like, "Are you okay with?" and then whatever the rest is. Would you be open to hearing a perspective of what my student shared, or what we're feeling at home, or would you be open to hearing about what it's like at our house when we're trying to do homework? Because that, and it's challenging, especially as the kids get older in school. Homework is nothing like we had back in whatever. For me, I'm old, but my parents trying to figure out math back then, even in the late 70s and 80s, that was a challenge for them. And
it's changed so much.
Yeah, and you think about now, especially with the pandemic and the challenges of parents trying to figure out how to be full-time employee and teacher and everything else, at home, it's hard. So
right.
I think parents can, my advice is always to just, if you ask the question, would you be open to as an introduction, or would you be willing to hear, or can I share a perspective with you? I've never met a person that would say no,
right.
My way or the highway. Because I think that introduces the desire for dialogue versus confrontation.
And it opens it up to, I think, a very disarming platform to respond, as opposed to now you're blaming me, and now I've got to justify what you just, in a sense, put blame on. It's very amazing how words and language and even tone can just be interpreted so many ways, which is why email is probably the worst thing to do to send when you're upset. And 9 times out of 10, I'm like, pick up the phone. Hey, because it's just that tone can just really change everything.
Yeah. Not that I'm a late afternoon TV watcher, but I want to give credit. I mean, I think it's Dr. Phil that said, one of the things we should ask ourselves is, do we want to be right, or do we want to be happy? Because sometimes we're so stuck on thinking that we're right that we fight for that at all costs. And that, I think the exploration of the dialogue is so valuable. Can I share a teaching story?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was a secondary math teacher way back when, and I had a teaching 7th grade math, and I had a student that I would say was average. He did okay on tests, but at the time, homework was a big part of the grade, and he many days would not have homework done. He would have a start on it, but he wouldn't have it done, and so he was really struggling. He was like the C-, D+. Sometimes he would have a couple weeks where he would be in the F range, and so I was really frustrated, because to me it was like, why can't you just do your homework? What's the big deal here? And so at that time, I kept him after class after a period of time, and I said, what's going on? Because you're not dumb. I mean, you're able to figure it out. You do well on tests, but you're not getting your homework done, and that's killing you in the grade factory. And he shared with me his life. So as a 7th grader, when he got off the bus, his mom went to work, single mother. He was then in charge of his younger sister for the evening. So he had dinner to make, had to help her with her homework, had to get her cleaned up and ready for bed. And by 9:30, 10 o'clock, the 7th grader was exhausted. And so he would start doing his homework, but end up falling asleep. And so I said at the time, after he shared the perspective, like, here's the plan we're going to put you on. And, we're going to provide you an alternate homework assignment so that you can be successful. The point being is that he didn't volunteer the experience. I had to ask for it. But had he came in and, or as a parent came in and shared that experience, we then can say, okay, let's get a modified plan. Let's fix this solution. It's not working for the student. We don't know why. We make an assumption about what's going on. And as an educator and social science person, as humans, our brains can't handle mystery. So when we don't know something, we'll fill in the gaps. We'll make up a story. And we make it up based on our experience and our understanding. And most of the time we're wrong. But that's the best we can do. So it is valuable. My plea to parents is it's valuable to put your experience and share that with your teacher so that they're aware of what's going on. Because at the end of the day, as you already said, the goal is to support the child as best we can.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we think, well, I can't open up and really share what it's really like because it should be different, or it's not what it's painted to be, or it's not what everybody, does, or what it looks like. And if we can just get to the point and be like, you know what, hey, it's kind of like this at our house. And like you said, like, just share with us what's really happening so that, and I'll go back to another question you said, which is a good one to pose. How can we? Okay, here's the issue and concern, and my issue and concern, your issue. How can we make this work for you and for me and for the kid? How can we? And if we come with that approach, wow, all of a sudden, like, now we're a team solving the problem together, not on opposite sides trying to, I have the perception that you're not doing enough. You think you're doing enough, but it's not enough. And then, where do we go from there? So I loved how you were saying, use and frame the question with, how might we?
Right. It really shifts the thinking dramatically. And I think a metaphor that I've used is, if I had a good friend and neither of us were exercising, and I said to them, tomorrow morning at 5:30, I'm going to be at your house. We are going to go for a run. And we're going to get on the 3-mile run, and that's what we're going to do. Well, my friend is going to put up all kinds of objections. I've got to be to work early tomorrow, or I've got to be up late tonight, or I don't have clothes to run tomorrow, or they're going to think of all the reasons why they don't want to get up at 5:30 and go for a run. But if I flip the question around and say, hey, look, friend, how might we get 45 minutes of running in tomorrow? Well, now we're in the creative problem solving phase. I didn't dictate a solution to them. I said, let's solve the problem. And so it just shifts the mind. And oftentimes when we put things out there, the objections go up, the roadblocks go up, and people think of all the hurdles that we have to climb over. And, as a former superintendent, that was my language a lot. Great. I understand you don't like the way this works. So how might we make this successful? A thought leader in the personal productivity space in the US, Michael Hyatt, uses language like, what's not true today that has to become true tomorrow for us to achieve the goals that we're looking for? Again, another way to shift the thinking. Instead of finding objections, okay, let's figure out what's not true. Let's make it true so that we can achieve our goals tomorrow. And again, these tools, that yes, there's some applicability outside of education, but they're great language to put around the conferences with teachers and parents. So what's not true with this relationship? What's not true with how my kid is being successful in the class? What do we have to do different to make this work? And every kid's different, every teacher's different, and not everything all just meshes together fine. It takes some intervention and some work. And so that's why I said originally, this is a partnership. It's not teacher parent, I know more, you know less, whatever. It's a partnership because the goal is to serve the kid.
Exactly. And that's what both people are showing up for. Both sides are showing up.
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
Really, at the end of the day, it's to support the kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love there was a little fourth grader that I had when I was a teacher, and I could not get to this kid. He wouldn't do any work for me. He was socially awkward. We didn't connect well with his peers. Like he was like my enigma, right? Like we always had one. And so I would have lunch with him just to like help try to figure out like, what can I do to help this kid like actually do his work and do this school thing? And you know what he said to me when I was having lunch with him one day? I just need a box and I need it just enclosed around me, and only you're allowed in, nobody else. And I was like, wow, he actually thinks that he would be successful if he's just completely just tucked away in his little, cocoon world, whatever that did in his mind, that's where he felt he was successful. So I was like, that is such a great idea. I don't have a box to put around you in the class. But why don't we move your desk, over against the wall? So it feels like that's your thing. And now that I know that you kind of like need your space, we'll just recognize that your space is yours. And he was so good hands-on, like he could create anything hands-on, but pencil paper, it was the hardest thing. It was like pulling teeth, getting him to do anything.
Yeah.
And do you know that I ran into an educator in his school several years ago, and she said he was then in middle school now, and she overheard him helping a younger kid who had similar behavior issues and problems and challenges school-wide, work-wise. And she said, and she heard him saying, well, there was this teacher, Dr. J, and she always just helped me. And so we're going to help you. And it was just so sweet. Like, cause you invest in these kids, you give, and a lot of teachers do. And that's why I just love even parents and teachers listening to this podcast. Like, thank you for everything you're doing, because you don't always hear that thanks in the end, right? You don't always have the child coming back or the parent coming back. So as hard as it might feel in moments, be encouraged today that here are some great questions to try and use the next time. Things might be a little stickier, challenging on either side. And both of us, all of us are showing up to do the best, to do our very best.
Yeah, exactly.
And here are some tips and tricks and ideas and questions that can just help us get to the end goal, which is the same goal.
Reaching the kids. Yes. Correct.
Reaching the kids.
Yeah.
So I just thank you so much for these ideas, these questions. They're almost like simple question stems that we can just write on a note card or keep on hand or just look at the next time, we walk into a conference or we get called for a conference. And I just appreciate you taking the time to share those with us today.
Yeah, and my pleasure. It's been an honor to be here and to share some ideas, and hopefully it's helped at least one person out there. And if so, I call that a victory for today. And like we said, we do this for kids. We're all in the same boat, trying to help kids be successful. And that's why we do what we do. And that's what parents want, and that's what we want. So we figure out a way to do it best together is a victory for all of us.
Me too. And we'll keep doing it. Thank you again.
You bet.
All right. Thanks. Goodbye.
Yep, bye-bye.